The year is 1823 and America is doing great. After the demise of the Federalist Party due to several questionable acts, the Democratic Republicans have been going strong. The economy is good, the issues over tariffs in the U.S. Bank have been resolved, for now, and James Monroe is about to finish his second term as president. Back in 1820, Monroe was elected to an almost unanimous electoral vote, which would have been unanimous, but the country wanted to make sure George Washington was the only president who won unanimously, so some dudes in New Hampshire threw their votes to this guy, John Quincy Adams. Make sure you remember him, he's kinda important. Anyway, since Monroe can't run for a third term because Washington didn't run for a third term, are you sensing a pattern here? It's time to elect a new president! Now you'd think since the country has been so chill for the last 8 years, this new election would be too, right? Wrong! The election of 1824 was one of the most contentious in American history, partly because of the amount of people running. It was kind of like the War of the Five Kings in Game of Thrones, complete with ineffectual leader who won by birthright, the stereotypical man of the people / angry general / fan favorite, and some candidates who really had no reason to be in the race at all. So let's look at some of them. The first candidate was John Quincy Adams. See, I told you he was important. Adams was the son of the second president of the United States, John Adams. He served as a senator and representative of Massachusetts as a Federalist. However, he was extremely disliked by pretty much everybody because the Federalists hated him because their leader, Alexander Hamilton, hated his father, and the Democratic Republicans hated him because they hated his father. Great job, John! So, he renounced his seat in the Senate and went back to Washington. This was good, since he's been in Washington politics since he was a child. He served under every president so far in some capacity, except Jefferson, because Jefferson and his father didn't like each other either. Quincy loved Europe and served as the minister to Prussia, Russia, the Netherlands, and England. He was also Secretary of State under Monroe and was a major contributor to the creation of the Monroe Doctrine. He also resembles an egg. The second candidate, William H. Crawford, was probably the most suited to be elected president out of the bunch. After serving as a senator from Georgia and becoming president pro tempore of the Senate, which basically means the most important senator, Crawford served as the minister to France, secretary of war under Madison, and secretary of treasury under Madison and Monroe. Crawford was the party favorite of the Democratic Republicans, meaning all the old dudes in Washington wanted him to win, but Crawford had one fatal flaw. He was super sick. He suffered a stroke back in 1823, which left him paralyzed and blind, and this caused him to lose a lot of support from everyday Americans who didn't want some blind dude in the White House. The next candidate was Henry Clay. Remember when Aaron Burr was accused of attempting to build his own Western Empire after shooting Hamilton? Well, this is the dude who defended him in court. For some reason, that inspired Clay to go into politics because that worked out so well for Burr. I don't know. He became a representative for Kentucky and was a pretty impressive dude apparently because on his first day on the job, he was voted Speaker of the House, which basically means the most important representative. He was a war hawk and an abolitionist, but he was mainly known for his American System financial plan, which promoted internal improvements and the creation of a national bank. The final candidate was Andrew Jackson. This dude was hugely popular in America after serving as a general for the U.S. Army in the War of 1812. He became a hero after leading the American troops into the Battle of New Orleans, which technically shouldn't have happened because the war was already over, but Jackson didn't know that, so the American people still considered him a hero. The point is, it was weird back then. He also invaded Florida for no reason except to deal with the Seminole Scourge on the other side that really wasn't bothering anybody. Florida was owned by Spain at the time, so you'd think it would have been a problem or something, but it actually led to the ceding of Florida to the U.S., so Spain was cool with it, I guess? I don't know. Although he had very limited political experience as the representative and later senator of Tennessee, his popularity with the American people made him a very viable candidate for the presidency. Oh, and there was also John C. Calhoun, but nobody likes John C. Calhoun. Okay, so a quick overview. Monroe was president, but he was about to retire, so his Secretary of State, his Secretary of War, and his Secretary of the Treasury all threw their hats in the ring. Adams had trouble because he was the son of John Adams, who wasn't very popular. Crawford was in trouble because he was sick as hell, and Calhoun was in trouble because nobody likes him. Clay and Jackson then joined the race, but they hurt each other because they both ran as candidates for the West and had to battle for the votes over there. Also, they hated each other. And Jackson hated Calhoun. And Quincy Adams, but we'll get into that later. But it was okay because the American people loved Jackson, but Washington, D.C. didn't want this crazy old outsider in the White House. They wanted Crawford, or at least Adams, but the American people disliked Crawford because he was super sick, and they disliked Quincy Adams because he was the son of John Adams. Don't worry if this gets weird or confusing, because it's about to get a lot simpler. Okay, so the election took place and it went down pretty much exactly how you'd expect it would. The West was split between Clay and Jackson, with Jackson also taking a lot of delegates from all over because he was popular like that. Crawford took his home state of Georgia, as well as Virginia, where Washington, D.C. was located, surprise, surprise there, and Adams took the Northeast, which included his home state of Massachusetts and some more northern states that felt like Adams would support them. And Calhoun won nothing. But he ran pretty much unopposed for vice president, so he won. Good job, Calhoun. While Jackson won in both the Electoral College and the popular vote, no candidate had a clear majority. What happened next was weird. According to the 12th Amendment, if no candidate received a majority of the vote, then the election would move to the House of Representatives, where all the representatives would vote for one of the top 3 vote recipients, and whoever got the most would be the president. Okay, so everything in this part of the video is kind of conjecture, but most people think it went down like this. After the results came in, Clay was super pissed because he got 4th place, meaning that he wouldn't be on the ballot in the House and that he had no way of being elected president. So Clay thought he needed to buddy up with one of the other 3 nominees in order to become Secretary of State, which was the next best thing. He couldn't go up to Jackson because they hated each other, and he couldn't go up to Crawford because he was probably having a stroke or something. And he wasn't going to win anyway, that also helped too. So he went up to Adams and offered to tell his delegates to vote for Adams if Adams gave Clay a spot as Secretary of State. Adams was like, cool bro, and the plan was put into action. And it worked. Adams took all the states that Clay won and beat Jackson and Crawford in the House to become president. Clay got his spot as Secretary of State, which historically has been a pretty good step to becoming president, so everything's cool, right? Wrong! After the election, Jackson was pissed at the corrupt bargain between Clay and Adams. Jackson had won the popular vote, but lost the presidency after all. He knew the cards were being stacked purposely against him, so he decided to beat Washington at its own game. He went to his friend, Martin Van Buren, and was like, Martin, this sucks. There's no way I'll ever be president if we let these Washington nerds play us like this. So they decided that the best way to beat Adams and Clay in the next election was to form their own political party, the Jacksonian Democrats, founded on a base of farmers, poor people, and generally being against anything Henry Clay liked. Then they waited. And waited, and waited, until finally the election of 1828. After an election cycle filled with mudslinging and personal attacks, Adams lost in a landslide after being portrayed as a pompous upper-class snob, leading a country increasingly attracted to the war heroism and everyman qualities of Andrew Jackson. So, Jackson won, and Adams became the second president to not be reelected, right after his dad. Good job, Adams is. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Jackson was kind of a dick. Bye!